Listen, if you've been a Scorsese fan as long as I have, you know that his movies can really be a roller coaster of emotions. And with his latest being a 3-hour plus mafia epic, you know I had to interrogate Zach about it, considering he got to see it early and was in the same room as these legends. Let us explain.
So what we do on Let Us Explain is dive deep on something that we can't stop thinking about for other people who can't stop thinking about that thing too. That means we'll be talking about some spoilers, but we're not going to get too heavy into them because this is a movie that's not out yet.
Yeah.
So don't worry if that's not your thing. Before we jump into the spoilers, let's talk more generally about The Irishman. I'm your co-host, Zachary Shevich, and joining me, I heard he paints houses. It's Arturo Zurita.
Hey, I have no idea what that means. We're making this video because Zach was able to catch the freaking premiere of this movie. Like, there's the premiere, then the critics got to see it, and there was a seat right next to Zach, but I was back home in Chicago, couldn't go to New York. He had a free seat right there with who in the crowd?
I believe we saw Martin Scorsese, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro,
and then the one that really ticks me off, Joe Pesci. I've been wanting. Oh my goodness! So this is a movie I'm very excited for because for myself, growing up with AMC Mobster Month, that was my Shark Week before the month. I loved it so much, and now that this movie's about to be out, I was like, all right, look, I haven't seen it, but we've done this before. Sometimes I haven't seen the movie, or you haven't seen the movie, and we'll be able to answer each other's questions. So if you haven't seen The Irishman, don't worry. I'm not going to get spoiled for myself, but what I hear is that it's almost the penultimate mobster movie for a man who almost didn't create the genre, but when it comes to like mentioning some of the best mobster movies out there, a lot of people would go with Scorsese, his Goodfellas, his Casino, and now he's got not a swan song per se, right? But we'll talk about it. I'm excited.
Absolutely. We'll get into a lot more detail. But yeah, I was lucky enough to catch that world premiere of The Irishman at the New York Film Festival. This is the latest Martin Scorsese movie, a guy who has made some of the most iconic movies in cinema history. And as you mentioned, particularly, he's made some of the most iconic mobster and crime movies in history, whether that's Mean Streets, whether that's
from the start.
Goodfellas, whether that's The Departed. He's an iconic filmmaker, and he's reuniting with one of his favorite on-screen partners, Robert De Niro, another one of his frequent on-screen collaborators, Joe Pesci, and somebody who, like, it's kind of mind-boggling to think that they've actually never made a film together, him and Al Pacino. And this is a movie that takes into consideration kind of the actor's legacy and, the big thing that people have been talking about in the lead-up to the movie is that they spent a lot of money on this de-aging process to make Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, Al Pacino all look younger, like they're more younger selves in several scenes in this movie. So that's a lot of what people have been talking about. But to me, that's ultimately not the most interesting thing about this movie. But I don't know where you wanted to start out with in regards to The Irishman.
I'll start off with, before anybody goes to see this movie, how much Scorsese should you be catching up on? What specific Scorsese should you be catching up on leading up to this movie, especially because of the content matter and how it's looking at older mobsters rather than the Goodfellas that we remember watching in the 90s.
Right. Well, I think one of the things about this movie, being that it's nearly 3.5 hours long, and when I say nearly, I mean it's 3 hours and 29 minutes long, is that it's trying to create that history for you in a way. What the de-aging ultimately serves in this movie is so that you can get a full sense of their lives. It's not so that they can be 30 or 40 or 50 for the duration of the movie. It does lead to them being older men. It's just so all of that, you can see that transition in one package. So I don't know if you necessarily need to have seen a lot of the Scorsese movies to appreciate that journey. That being said, I think that because Goodfellas is so integral to the beats of this genre, because Mean Streets is so integral to the beats of this genre, and because those are also famed collaborations with the likes of Robert De Niro, with the likes of Joe Pesci, that will add to your enjoyment of the movies. Also, it's because those movies have such a more violent legacy that I think seeing the contrast in The Irishman would be helpful. So, if I'm preparing homework for somebody, I say you have to see Goodfellas. You probably should see Mean Streets, Casino, and The Departed. There's probably a few others that you could throw in there. Most of the stuff that he's done with De Niro, Taxi Driver is probably something that will be worth watching before this movie, even though it's sort of unrelated.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, it's I think that's part of the reason it's so long, is that it can kind of stand up on its own.
Okay, that's good. That's pretty dope. I don't know. Feel free to add some other stuff. My biggest thing when it comes to a cast like this is the acting.
Yeah.
And you know
it's
which
got
actor.
A great cast.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, there are some people who have been talking about some of the other roles, but it's basically the people that I mentioned who are the most notable people in it. There's actually a surprisingly prominent Ray Romano part that's pretty fun in this movie too.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
He's been doing that a lot lately, just appearing in movies and going like, hey.
Yeah.
Everybody loves Raymond.
Yeah, and Bobby Cannavale shows up a bit.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So give me the scope of the story of it being 3 hours, and you're telling me, does it jump back and forth? Is it done chronologically?
It's done pretty much chronologically. It has the classic framing of a guy talking about his life. So it opens on Robert De Niro in a retirement home. So, we are jumping back and forth in that sense where it's the older Robert De Niro reflecting on his life. But it goes from that part. It does, and there is a little bit of time jumping throughout the movie, but for the most part, it's chronological. That's cool. Goes from Robert De Niro in that retirement home to him when he's younger. I will say it is a little bit fuzzy because, while the de-aging for the most part looks good, it's not exactly clear how old they're always supposed to be. Joe Pesci, when he's introduced to Robert De Niro's character, calls him kid, and De Niro does not look like a kid. He looks like he's at least 39. But, it works, I guess.
Say nobody told you about the de-aging, right? That wasn't something they pushed at all as a marketing gimmick. And you go in there and you go, because Marvel surprises with those several times. Is that Michael Douglas?
That wasn't a big part of the hype around the Marvel
so if it wasn't a
movies,
part of the hype, do you think it would have caught you off guard as well? In the sense of you not having to go in with those expectations. And you just sit there and it hits you with it and you'd be like, that's interesting. I didn't know they were going to do that.
I mean, yeah, I think it maybe would have not been so much of the focus, but the thing is that so much of the movie is involved with the de-aging. I'd say
there's no way you can't mention it.
75% of the time that De Niro's on screen, he is de-aged.
Okay, that's just bringing up more questions. But go ahead.
So it's the thing that it's so prominent that you can't help but notice it, and while it works for the most part in the scenes where they're very still, it's in the scenes where they have to move around more that I think it doesn't work as well. There's a moment where Robert De Niro throws a guy to the curb and then tries to sort of like kick him while he's down on the curb. And the actor, I mean, the character is clearly in his 40s. The actor is clearly in his 70s.
Is this a Captain Marvel Samuel Jackson effect? Where he was running like Samuel L. Jackson's real age and not the, 20, 30-year-old he was supposed to be?
Exactly. There's a really amusing moment in that Q&A from the New York Film Festival I sent you a link to before. We'll make sure to link it down below, where Scorsese was actually talking about how they were filming a scene and somebody pointed out to him that Pacino didn't quite get up the right way.
Yeah.
And they're talking to Pacino and they're like, Al, the character's 49 and you're getting out of your chair like you're a 70-year-old. So.
The same thing happened in Captain Marvel. They said the same thing to Samuel L. Jackson. That's been one of the most interesting things with the aging, that they're forgetting that the effects doesn't affect the way you move your body. So that's interesting.
Right. And that's something that maybe we'll see in the future.
But it wasn't distracting enough for you, yet. Right?
It didn't fully take me out of the movie, but it was something that I was paying attention to. I think maybe if I wasn't in, that first audience where it's like I'm trying to test whether or not it works, I might not be paying attention to it as much.
I feel you.
Now that I've told you about it and you have an expectation going in, it might be able to fade a little bit more into the background for you.
Okay. Because, he's done stuff like Hugo in the past, so it's not like he hasn't been effects heavy either, which some people have made a big deal about.
And that being said, it's ultimately through the performances where this thing will work better or work worse. And I think that the performances are really good. De Niro is still really compelling. And even if, his face still reads age, I think he's good at expressing when he's not supposed to be as young, as old or as experienced. And you definitely get the progression of his character. I think really where the movie and where the acting shines in those later moments, once the aging has sort of been wiped away and the actors are allowed to show some signs of aging. That's when their performances really get special to me, both Pesci and De Niro. So Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's the first 2/3 kind of really serves the latter third. In that sense, is it a little slow? Maybe, yeah. I mean, it still is a
not too concerned about that, but yeah.
It's still a Scorsese crime movie, so all of his movies have a certain pace to them, and there's banter and there's fun moments. But it's an extended movie, and I will say that even at 3 hours 29 minutes, it felt faster than some 2-hour movies I've seen.
Faster than Silence? Previous?
Yeah, definitely faster than Silence. Although,
Okay.
Silence actually might be an interesting thing to add to that homework assignment list, because the end of this movie is much more contemplative in the way that Silence is.
The way that you've described it to me, it's it's these guys contemplating life, which, again, that's some of the most recent stuff that he did with his Catholicism, which is a big reason why he had made Silence and had been wanting to make that for a long time. Talk to me about Joe Pesci. I'm just going to cut to the chase. Tell me about Joe Pesci.
Well, this is such an interesting performance for him too, because he is such a warmer character than I think we're used to seeing him portrayed as. He's got this wise guy edge in a lot of his movies. The iconic Joe Pesci scene is Funny How, where he is threatening someone.
Yeah,
and I think in this movie you see a much more reasonable guy, a much more in control guy. He and De Niro have a very loving relationship in the movie. And I think it's a very great performance because, on Twitter I was seeing a lot of reactions about who was the standout actor in this movie. And to me, it seemed like pretty 50-50 on people complimenting Joe Pesci and people complimenting Al Pacino. And
I like that.
while I get the Al Pacino comments, because Al Pacino is a really, dynamic screen presence and he has a fun role, this is kind of like classic Al Pacino. He's loud, he's yelling, he's being the center of attention. It's not necessarily something we're not used to from Al. But this is something that's a lot gentler than what we're used to seeing from Joe Pesci.
Okay.
And there's like an intimacy to his performance that I thought was really stunning. Like I mentioned, the movie follows them through years and years, and as you see Pesci grow older, you see the ways that his character kind of softens, and he loses some of the power that he had in the beginning of the movie. And I think that's some of the most effective stuff in the film.
Pretty interesting.
Seeing the way that he kind of changes throughout time.
So would you say he's more aggressive in his interviews than
he
is
absolutely.
in the movie?
Absolutely. He's much more cantankerous in the Q&A than he is throughout Irishman.
To come off of the de-aging and specifically focusing on Martin Scorsese, do you think hiring actors who are younger to just portray them would have been a better effect than the de-aging?
So, I mean...
now we're also talking Marty also embraced Netflix. My next thing is going to be the Netflix talk, but to embrace Netflix, to embrace these effects when a lot of other people are still going up. Got to be on film, got to be practical, cinema. And Marty seems to be getting a lot of things here. De-aging his actors with really big technology, going to Netflix, a bunch of these different things. Starting with that one. Did he make the right choice in de-aging, or do you think it would have been better?
He was talking about how this is a project that other studios wouldn't say yes to because it did cost a lot of money, and the de-aging process was a big thing. And for a while the technology just wasn't there even. Mm-hmm. So it is interesting to sort of see him embrace this idea. And there is that idea of like, well, could he have just cast other actors, or could he have done this in another way? And to an extent, like, I don't know how fair it is to criticize that because I'm not.
We don't know that version, and that version can also be just as corny when you're like, that guy's supposed to be that.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you send me the script for The Irishman and you ask me to direct it, I don't think that one of my first 3 thoughts is let's get old guys and de-age them.
Yeah, first of all, you'd make it 90 minutes. $159 million is the reported budget for this thing,
and that's without a lot of the marketing costs that usually get factored into stuff like that. So that is a big bet for Netflix. Would I have gone a different route than doing the de-aging? Potentially, I see the benefit of
we're
doing
not
the
Scorsese.
de-aging.
Yeah,
I think like maybe it would have worked a little bit better in the more traditional getting a younger actor and aging them up idea. But we mentioned the idea of this being kind of like a legacy movie for Scorsese. And like if you buy into the idea of the metatextual narrative sort of enhancing this film, if you buy into the idea that knowing De Niro and Scorsese made Goodfellas together, made Mean Streets together, made all these movies that have such a violent legacy to them, and are now revisiting that under sort of a different context, under the circumstances of being later in their life and reflecting on all they've done. If that all sounds interesting to you, then the de-aging process is worth it, because it adds so much to the idea that this is something that these guys are putting out as a statement. If you're just looking for like what would have made the movie The Irishman most effective, then maybe getting somebody a little younger in there for the majority of it could have worked.
That's a great way to put it.
That's not what the purpose of the movie is.
Yeah. Then I really do think you should be watching and seeing the relationships these collaborators have had with each other. I feel
absolutely, yeah. And for us, for guys like us, that's really interesting to see how they've evolved. And there's a moment in the movie where De Niro shows up, and the de-aging technology makes him look not just like a younger De Niro. It makes him look like Taxi Driver De Niro. It's really
That's
weird.
Scary. He looked like, what's his name in Neighbors 2 when he comes out dressed up as him. I gotta ask this
like
question.
Dave Franco for some reason.
I gotta ask this question.
Yeah.
They're all Italian.
Yes.
From what I know, they've been Italian. Why the hell is it called The Irishman?
So I believe De Niro's character is Irish. I think he learned Italian while he was stationed in Italy during a war for his character in the movie. But his character in the movie is Irish.
And Joe Pesci's also Irish?
No, Joe Pesci is Italian. Just about everybody else that shows up in the movie is Italian.
Okay.
It's not even the title that I would have gone with. I mean, it's The Irishman is such a bland title. And there's a part of me that thinks it's not the title Scorsese wanted to go with either, because there's two separate title cards in the movie for...
Get out.
It says, I Hear You Paint Houses, which is the name of the book that it's based on, and to me is a badass title, especially once you know that paint houses is kind of like mob slang for kill people.
Yeah.
I Hear You Paint Houses.
Bro, this is like when they removed and they called it Live, Die, Repeat or Edge of Tomorrow, when originally it should have been All You Need Is Kill.
Yeah.
That's, oh my goodness.
Maybe we're in the age of multiple titles for movies, I guess.
Yeah. Interesting.
But what else did you want to know? I mean, like I've mentioned, I thought this was a really interesting movie that fits into the legacy, although it's not necessarily better than films like Goodfellas or The Departed or Casino. I think, particularly in its last hour and a half, really has a lot to say, like similarly to those movies. And it's totally worth watching if you like those types of films.
In terms of just 2019 within the year, is it up there in your top 10 for you personally?
When I finished watching it, I didn't think that it was going to rank very highly for me, and then I kind of sat down and with my list on Letterboxd, and I was looking at some of the other stuff I've seen. It's like, there is kind of a lot there.
It's new Scorsese.
It's new Scorsese. There's only so low that I can rank it. I kind of had the same thing. We talked about the new Tarantino. I walked out of it kind of...
I was just about to ask you, if you had to compare the two, who did the better release this year?
And that's a really good question.
We had new Scorsese, new Tarantino this year, bro.
And they're probably going to be going head-to-head at the Oscars in many ways. So
that'll bring my other question, where it comes to the categories where you think it should be nominated. There was a big announcement that Netflix is really pushing its technical aspects of this movie, from cinematography to the de-aging, in order to be something. I don't know how that's going to do with Disney and, the movies they got that are also doing the same thing, but...
Right. Well, if you look at some films like Benjamin Button or whatever that have done some similar-ish ideas, they've gotten visual effects nominations, so I wouldn't be surprised if this got into some categories like that.
Can it beat the raccoon talking? I don't know. We'll see.
I also don't know what the visual effects branches are really looking for.
Well, I think what they're looking for, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they're looking for movies that are like theme parks.
Yes.
And that way, there's a lot more visually to be seen, and I'm not sure if Martin Scorsese...
Right. It's not really the kind of movie that he makes. So I would not be surprised to see this in a few categories like visual effects, maybe in production design. Probably in cinematography, as are most Scorsese movies, they're very compellingly shot. Steve Zalian, who wrote the screenplay, I think will get nominated. I think that the question when it comes to supporting actor is if this movie will get one nomination or two, not whether or not it'll be in there.
Okay.
I think ultimately it's one of those movies where maybe once the awards start coming in and everybody starts giving awards to Pesci or everybody starts giving awards to Pacino, one guy will sort of fade to the back of the race. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if either one necessarily stands a better chance than the other. I would guess, just as an Oscar observer, that Joe Pesci, given that he has not been in a movie in over 10 years, has a better shot here. Yeah. I could see De Niro getting in for acting too. We've talked on other Intercut episodes about how this is a stacked year for Best Actor, which is the only reason why I feel like maybe he's not a lock. Mm-hmm. But in recent years, it's felt like when a movie is a front runner for Oscars, it doesn't just get like 2 or 3 nominations; it gets like 5 or 7. So if Irishman is really going to stay in this front runner status, I would expect a couple acting nominations. Maybe a Best Director nomination for Scorsese, and probably a Best Picture nomination as well.
Intriguing. I got one last one, because obviously once we see it, we'll be doing another follow-up when it comes to it, because I know, like you've been saying, that maturity in it that it has. Like, he's almost looking back on his own career, and he was able to get all the people who he's worked with or hasn't worked with, but we've known as these icons. I'm sure there's a lot more to talk about. But it's so crazy that I want to, not necessarily end it, but really push it on this question that who knew would be a topic before? There will be a trend on, do you want to watch the movie on Netflix at the beginning of the month, or do you want to catch it in theaters at the beginning of the month, or just wait till Netflix at the end of the month? There is several movies, Two Popes, Laundromat, it's happening for right now. It's going to happen for this one. It's going to happen for a lot of Netflix releases coming out, including Amazon releases like The Aeronauts, where you can see it on December 1st in theaters, or you could wait to maybe see it. I mean, I don't know. They don't have to guarantee that it's going to be on the site, but that happened with Roma last year as well. So catch it in theaters or wait till later. I ask you, with a 3-hour and something movie, I know my answer is see it in theaters because it's Scorsese, but would you tell majority of the general audience, should they see it in the comfort of their own home, or is it worth rushing out to theaters?
Well, I would definitely not recommend watching it at 9 in the morning the way that I did in theaters. That's not necessarily what I want to do.
And when not everybody else had Joe Pesci at the screening too.
True. Like, there's certain incentives that brought me there, and I don't regret it. But I don't think that's the ideal way to watch a 3.5-hour gangster epic from Martin Scorsese. I think there's something to be said about putting yourself in a movie theater and subjecting yourself to the story, kind of sans distraction, especially a story that's kind of slow and meditative and builds like this one, True. It's not exactly silence, but the way that I feel like silence, it's much easier to devote your attention to it if you're in a movie theater rather than at home, next to your cell phone, next to your bathroom, next to your dog.
I agree.
I just don't know if this is the kind of movie that necessarily benefits from the distractions that are around you in the home. That being said, I know there's a lot of people who don't want to sit in a theater for 3.5 hours.
Dude, I could not do that for Once Upon a Time. The movie had nothing to do with it. The movie has nothing to do with my butt cheek sitting in the music box, getting canker sore. So that would be the one thing. But if you are able to see it in a theater with the recliners that we now have.
Exactly. And that's the other thing is, I think, the fact that it's Netflix and Netflix movies don't play at AMC's and they don't play at Regals also complicates it for some people because...
Wow, you're right. That's true. They have that whole thing. Wow.
You talk to me about how you have a chance to see it, but it's in the least comfy theater that's around you.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if I would tell you to sit in like a wooden chair for 3.5 hours to watch this movie. If you do have that recliner... If you do have that recliner treatment...
Scorsese, just because it's a Netflix movie, that explains so much of the releases that are only at the Music Box right now. Not even Little Monsters, because it's going to be on Hulu at the end of the month, can be played on AMC. And you're going to ignore Martin Scorsese, Two Popes by the guy who did City of God. That's a whole nother video right there. Don't even get me started. Wow. You know what? So support Netflix. Support your local indie streaming sites. That's ridiculous, man. That's crazy.
So
I don't know.
To me, that's the thing. It's like, I do think it's a movie that's better experienced in the theater, but I'm also realistic, and I'm not going to tell you to drive an hour away to like the comfy theater that happens to be playing the Scorsese
Bro,
movie.
I did that for Silence, and I had to sit like this because the seats were all jacked up. I was like, look, I'm not asking for a massage chair, but for 3 hours, take care of my cheeks for a little bit. Like, I don't know, man. How's your popcorn like $27? 3 payments of $29.99, but I can't get a comfortable seat over here. That really sucks that AMC is not playing it, and those are the number one recliner people. Damn. That's okay. All right. I got you there. How would you compare it? A lot of people are mobster fans. Do you think they're going to get the mobster itch that they want, or are they going to go into this kind of like a lot of people did with Tarantino and went, oh, this is for the film nerds. This isn't the Tarantino. There was no action till the end.
I mean, when you say that, I'm assuming you're talking about somebody who has a little bit of knowledge of like the history of crime in the USA.
You're going in there wanting to see a Goodfellas too. Are you going to be disappointed?
And the thing that we haven't mentioned yet is that Al Pacino plays Jimmy Hoffa in this movie, like the legendary. I just read that up a
little bit. Yeah, I was like, what?
Like head of the Teamsters and notorious mob operator. Like that's the way that the movie sort of crosses paths with history, like almost like a Forrest Gumpian crossing paths through history, is intriguing and adds another layer to it. That's the thing that's most interesting in the middle bit of the movie to me. So if you are somebody who's just very interested in the mob genre of films, there's definitely a lot here for you. Yeah,
sounds good. All right, I'm excited.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's about all for this edition of Let Us Explain. We'll be back with more thoughts on The Irishman once Art gets a chance to see it. But if you've seen it or if you're looking forward to seeing it, let us know in the comments down below or by shooting us an email, intercutpod@gmail.com. You can also catch more from me, Zach Shevich, by following me on Twitter, Instagram, or Letterboxd @ZShevich. And check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/multiplexshow. Art, where can people catch more from you?
Find me at the A to Z Show on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, I think, if it wasn't something that I mentioned. Also, Let Me Explain on the similar sites. But you can catch me here every week on the Intercut Podcast.
Yeah, you can listen to every episode of the Intercut Podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcatcher. I happen to like Overcast. Then make sure you're subscribed not just to the audio podcast, but to the video feed as well on youtube.com/intercutpod, where you can catch our bright, smiling faces as we break down the latest in entertainment. Find new episodes of the Intercut Podcast every week. And please leave us a comment, like the video, considering heading over to iTunes to leave us a 5-star review, and like our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages. All of them are at IntercutPod to get updates throughout the week from me, from Art, from all the guests that we feature here on Intercut. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, whenever somebody tells you they're a little concerned, they're very concerned.
Wish I knew what that meant. I will soon.